Hi and Assalamu alaikum dear students. Welcome to a new video of mine with a new lecture on a new topic, and today we are going to discuss the topic 20th century English drama, and the drama that we are going to discuss today is Pygmalion by G.B. Shaw. Before going into details about the story of this particular play, let me tell you something about the writer G.B. Shaw. George Bernard Shaw is basically an Irish dramatist who was born on July 26, 1856 and died on November the 2nd, 1950. Shaw produced a long list of dramas in the modern times, but he is best known for his play Pygmalion. Pygmalion is one of the best plays by G.B. Shaw. So let's discuss the story of it. But before discussing the story of this particular play, let me tell you the main characters of this play. First important character is that of Professor Henry Higgins. Professor Henry Higgins is basically a 40 years old unmarried person who is a specialist or expert in phonetics. Phonetics is a branch of linguistics related to study of sounds, scientific study of sounds in any language or dialect. So he is a specialist in phonetics, and he is also a popular authority on the subject of dialects, accents and phonetics. Next important character is Eliza Doolittle. She is the protagonist of this particular play. She is, you can say, a heroine of this play, though an unconventional and a very different kind of a heroine, but still she is the centralmost figure of this play. She is an uneducated, rude, uncivilized type of a flower girl who sells flowers in the streets or the roads to the passerbys. We are introduced to this character in the very opening of the play when Mr. Higgins notices her and decides to mold her into a duchess. It was Professor Henry Higgins who decides to polish the appearance of Eliza Doolittle later on in the play and convert her into a genteel kind of a lady, and he remains successful up to a certain extent. Round about she is 20 years old. Next important character is Alfred Doolittle. Alfred Doolittle is basically a father to Eliza Doolittle. He is a dustman, a garbage collector, and he believes that he does not deserve to belong to the poor class of the society. And later on, because of the recommendations of Henry Higgins, he becomes a moralist who delivers moral lectures during different social gatherings. Next important character is that of Colonel Pickering, another important character. He is a gentlemanly character, a retired officer who is also concerned with linguistics and phonetics, and he has done a research on Indian dialects and wrote a book named Spoken Sanskrit, and he came to England in the play to meet the famous professor Henry Higgins. He is courteous and very polite type of a person. Particularly, he is very courteous towards Eliza Doolittle. It was he who asks Henry Higgins to polish Eliza Doolittle into a duchess. So this is his character. Next important character is Mrs. Higgins. She's mother to Professor Higgins, and she particularly disapproves the manners, the language and the social behavior of his son. Next important character is Mrs. Eansford Hill. She is an upper middle class lady, though she is currently living a poor life, but still she is sticking to her genteel kind of a behavior. Next important character is Clara Eansford Hill. She is daughter to Mrs. Eansford, and she is trying to act like a modern, advanced, young type of a girl. Next important character is Freddie Eansford Hill. He is son to Mrs. Eansford and brother to Clara. And he is the person who is particularly impressed by the beauty of Eliza Doolittle when he meets her for the first time in the play. Next important character is Mrs. Pierce. She is Professor Henry Higgins' housekeeper, and it was she who, at the advice of Miss Professor Henry Higgins, changes Eliza Doolittle's appearance and washes her and changes her dress as well. So these are the important characters in the play Pygmalion. Let's discuss the story of this play. Before telling you about the story of this play, let me tell you the background to the play. What inspired the creation of this play by G.B. Shaw. Basically, Pygmalion word is taken from Greek language, and in the Greek culture there used to be a sculptor and his name was Pygmalion. Pygmalion used to hate women, and because of this extreme hatred for the women lot, he decided not to marry in his lifetime and live a bachelor's life, a lonely kind of a life. But as he was a sculptor as well, so one day he creates a beautiful sculpture of a woman, a female, right? And it turns out to be such a beautiful sculpture that Pygmalion falls in love with it. And at one stage, he desires that this sculpture should have been living. So he prays to goddess Venus that she should put life into this sculpture and convert it into a real female so that he can physically make love to it. After prayer, when he returns back home, he finds that his sculpture has turned into a real female. When he kisses her upon the lips, he feels that its lips are soft and warm. So he was extremely excited at this information. So this is background to this particular play. Over here, the role of Pygmalion is played by Professor Henry Higgins, who is an expert in phonetics. The play opens within summer evening in London's Covent Garden, where a group of people are together, standing together near a St. Paul's church because they were seeking protection from the rain. And in this group, there was Mrs. Eansford Hill and her daughter Clara. Both were waiting for their son Freddie, who was sent to fetch a taxi for them. But Freddie returns empty-handed and he is resent by his mother. In the process, he collides with a flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, and destroys all her flowers in the process. After this collision with Eliza Doolittle, the flower girl, Freddie goes to fetch the taxi for his family. In the meanwhile, there comes a gentleman in the porch of St. Paul's Church, and this gentleman is introduced to us later on with the name of Colonel Pickering, the same character, right? And he is a gentlemanly looking type of a person, and Eliza Doolittle goes to him and tries to sell her flowers to him, but he refuses to buy. But instead of that, he gives an amount of money to her without taking the flower, without buying the flower, as alms or as charity. Girl is about to take the money, but people from the crowd warned the girl that she should not take the money from this gentleman because somebody is looking at her and noticing down something about her in his diary. And that gentleman who was noticing Eliza Doolittle, he comes towards Eliza Doolittle, and at this Eliza Doolittle complains that she is a good girl and she was taking this money out of goodwill. She is not a bad type of a girl. But at this, Professor Henry Higgins introduces himself to Eliza Doolittle and Colonel Pickering and tells her that he is basically a professor who studies the accents and pronunciation and dialects and languages of people. He further tells Eliza that he can tell the background of people on the basis of their accents and language and pronunciation. And he tells Eliza Doolittle that on the basis of her language, he can tell her that she belongs to this area, she has come from this area. And Eliza Doolittle is extremely surprised at it. And all the people in the crowd, they are also surprised. They think that he might be a magician. And in the process, Freddie returns with the taxi. But when he comes to know that his family has already gone back home using another taxi, then Eliza Doolittle takes the same taxi brought by Freddie and sits in it and returns back to her home in a nervous haste. In the meanwhile, Colonel Pickering tells Professor Henry Higgins that he has come all the way from India to England to meet him, means Professor Henry Higgins. And Professor Henry Higgins, in return to this, he says that he also wanted to meet him. In the next scene, we see Professor Henry Higgins in his home along with Colonel Pickering. They were discussing language and phonetics, and in the process, in the meanwhile, Mrs. Pierce, the housekeeper of Professor Henry Higgins, arrives and tells Henry Higgins that a girl wants to see him, meet him, and she is asked to bring the girl in. He finds that it is the same girl, Eliza Doolittle, whom he has met in the opening of the play near St. Paul's Church. Eliza Doolittle asks Henry Higgins that if he teach her phonetics and the ability to read the accents and pronunciations and language of the people, and on the basis of that know about their backgrounds, then for that she will pay him. At this, Professor Henry Higgins smiles and laughs that a simple flower girl would be able to pay him for this. At this, Colonel Pickering bets with Professor Henry Higgins that if he converts this flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, into a duchess by changing her accent and language and overall appearance, then he would pay all the fees for his coaching. Professor Henry Higgins accepts this challenge and calls his housekeeper, Mrs. Pierce, and asks her to take the girl and change her clothes, wash her, and change her appearance. In the meanwhile, there arrives Alfred Doolittle, father to Eliza Doolittle, in search of his daughter, because he has come to know that Professor Henry Higgins has taken his daughter to his home, and he was trying to blackmail money out of him at this. But Professor Henry Higgins handles him in a diplomatic manner and calms him down. And Alfred Doolittle at the end says that okay, if he gives him £5, then he would allow him to keep his daughter for a while. So he is given £5. Then Alfred Doolittle returns. Then sometimes later, Higgins brings Eliza to his mother's house on a certain day, and on that day there was Freddie and his mother and his sister present. When they meet Eliza Doolittle, then they are surprised at the appearance of Eliza Doolittle. In fact, they could not recognize her, and they enter into conversation with Eliza Doolittle. Eliza Doolittle talks about the death of one of her relatives, and at the end of this meeting, they are quite impressed with the appearance and overall change and positive change in the external behavior and attitude of Eliza Doolittle. When they depart for their homes, Professor Henry Higgins' mother tells the professor that Eliza Doolittle is yet to be ready. She needs more polish, she needs more improvement in her language, in her behavior, in her external manners. Then after some times, Colonel Pickering, Eliza Doolittle, and Professor Henry Higgins return late in the evening to the home of Professor Henry Higgins, and they were returning from a party thrown by an ambassador, and Eliza Doolittle over there proved to be a success as far as her external appearance, behavior, and dealing with the people is concerned. And Colonel Pickering and Higgins were quite excited at this, that their efforts bore fruit for them, and they have remained successful in changing Eliza Doolittle. In this way, Professor Henry Higgins wins the bet. In this delight and happiness, they forget about Eliza Doolittle. They forget to credit Eliza Doolittle for this success. As a result of that, Eliza Doolittle feels angry, and she throws a sleeper at Professor Henry Higgins out of anger and leaves the home angrily. The next day, Professor Henry Higgins comes to his mother's house completely confused where Eliza has gone. So he calls the police so that police should help him find Eliza Doolittle. But he is surprised to know that Eliza Doolittle was staying at the home of his mother upstairs. In the process, Mr. Alfred Doolittle appears on the scene, and he has come to Mrs. Higgins' home in search of his daughter because he wanted to invite his daughter to his marriage, and his daughter Eliza Doolittle promises that she would attend her father's marriage, and Mrs. Higgins also says that she would attend the marriage. When they were leaving, Professor Henry Higgins asks Eliza Doolittle to return to him after attending the marriage, but Eliza Doolittle refuses to return because she said that she wanted to live an independent life, and she has decided to get married to Freddie. And then at the end, she opens a flower shop for herself. In this way, the play ends. G.B. Shaw, through this play, basically wants to tell us that no matter how much effort you can make to change the appearance and language and external manner of a person, you cannot change the original nature of a person, mentality of a person. Whatever you do, the person will return back to his or her roots. And this exactly happens to Eliza Doolittle. He changes her into a duchess and genteel kind of a lady, a very polished kind of a lady, but still at the end, she returns to her same profession and opens a flower shop for herself. I hope today's lecture would be of some benefit to you. You would have understood the story by G.B. Shaw of Pygmalion. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.